And just to make an announcement, Zukiswa Fokazi, and just to make an announcement that lunch will commence upon Ms. Fokazi completing her testimony, and we will thereafter reconvene around 2:30 to proceed with the program.
And tell the witness not to rush too much. We are not that hungry.
Members of the panel, just to clarify, the presentation that will be made now is not evidence to be led by an evidence leader. It will be a presentation, and I will ask questions at the end if necessary, and then the panel can ask questions.
No, I understand that. I understand that, but tell the presenter, shall we say.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zukiswa Vuka, or you can call me Zukiswa Fokazi. That's the name on my ID.
Can't hear. Can you hear us?
Firstly,
Can't hear.
Can't hear.
You can't hear me. I don't know. Firstly, thank you for this opportunity. It's very nice to be in Joburg, enjoying a glass of water, and just to be in a different space and able to see different people and different people from different spaces. I can see there's TAC, Afternoon Comrades, SJC, and everyone else. I'm not really sure how much time I have. Yeah. Okay. So firstly, I want to introduce Unite Behind as a coalition that came about last year in May. So hashtag Unite Behind is a voluntarily association people's movements with legal policy and support organizations, which is advocating for justice and an equal society. Under the banner of Unite Behind, we have about 23 and plus organizations that are around Cape Town. So we came about on the day of the memorial service of the fallen leader and comrade Ronnie Kasrils, which was on the 6th of April, 2017. So we emerged. If people remember, on the same night, I stand corrected, on the same night there was a reshuffle in the country where Mr. Pravin Gordhan and Mr. Jonas, which were from the Ministry of Finance, were reshuffled on the same day of the memorial service, and the day after. I don't know what's going on. It's me. Sorry. So that's when Unite Behind came about. So the main mission for Unite Behind is to build, as I said, is to build a just and an equal society where people shall share their country's wealth. So and obviously be able to participate in any decision that is being made that is going to directly affect people. So one of the things that we aim to advocate for, or we're still striving for even today, especially in the Western Cape, is to have an environment where people are able to, as I said, are able to make decisions and have access to reliable transport. So I've been introduced to someone that's going to speak on PRASA, but I'm also going to speak a bit about state capture and how PRASA is affecting our daily lives, or how the crisis at PRASA, or the fact that for the past 5 weeks in Cape Town, Northern Line and Southern Line trains have not been running. So we're aiming to build a safe, reliable, efficient, and equality public transport system, particularly, as I said before, the commuter rail service. Obviously dealing with epidemic corruption, state capture, as I said, political interference by executive, incompetence and maladministration at PRASA. But as I said before, the most important thing that we're talking about at this moment is the urgent need for people to intervene, not just the parliament, but commuters, other provinces as well. We need to intervene and talk about the state of railway system or the transportation mode, which is PRASA in Cape Town. So at the moment, the current issues that are facing PRASA is we can't deny the fact that we need an immediate, not an interim board, we need a board that's going to be accountable to Parliament. We need a board that we can trust, and we need a board that can bring evidence and submit word just ran out, and basically to account. So last week on Thursday, we made a request to Parliament to give them oral submission. Last year, we compiled a document or evidence, which is PRASA Leaks. So we wanted to give evidence because we have been speaking to PRASA, speaking to the Minister of Transport, sending letters and trying to actually intervene. That is before the two central lines were closed. But we haven't had that much interaction or that much feedback. And we've had protests in between. So what we need at the moment, as I said, is the PRASA board that can be able to account. And then we need a safety plan, safety emergency plan that is going to take care of the commuters. That is going to include women and children in trains, people with disability, elderly people. We need to have access to emergency when something has happened to you on the trains. At this moment, we don't have such. So that's what is an emergency at PRASA. Sometime in 2015, I think in August, the public protector, Umamu Tulima Donsela, had a report which was derailed, which on that report she specifies or she talks about the maladministration that's happening at PRASA, procurement regulations, and she also talks about the level of corruption. Within the same report, she has remedies, right? So it's one of the things that we always refer to in whatever that we do. We always refer to the report that she gave. At the time she submitted the report, PRASA had a CEO who was Mr. Lucky Montana. Within the report, Mr. Lucky Montana, Roy Moodley, and the others are implicated. So right immediately after that, Mr. Lucky Montana resigned. And then someone else came as a CEO of PRASA, Mr. Popo Molefe. So Popo Molefe replied by a letter to both the board, stating that they need to consider the derailed report, which was submitted by Mamutule Madonzel. So there was a response back saying they do acknowledge the letter, and then they will, obviously, they will be able to see or try to implement some of the remedies. So within the report as well, it also talks about people that have been corrupt and people that are implicated into the corrupt tenders. There's two tenders that I'd like to particularly speak about. First one is Yangena, second one is Sufambo. The Sufambo tender was meant to give us locomotives. If you comrades remember, in Cape Town, there was an incident where we received trains which were the specs were much more taller than it was supposed to be. So that's one of the things that we're talking about. How does a functioning department, according to what they say, how does a functioning department a state-owned entity that's supposed to be catering for millions of people, not only in Cape Town, but across the country, including Joburg. How is it possible that they can buy or a train that's not fitting the railroad tracks? It didn't make sense. So it's one of the reasons why we were able to dig down and come up with PRASA leaks. And then the second one, Siangena, was for coaches. So we were meant to get, if I can go back and quote, if I remember correctly, that was in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. So the tender between PRASA, it was saying we need to have, I think 200, not 200. I might be wrong. But in the period of 10 years, we were supposed to get coaches, which we still waiting for even now. Yes, we're still waiting for them even now, which is one of the contributions and one of the reasons why we're sitting with a crisis in the Western Cape. So one thing that I also want to speak about is the casualties that are happening within the midst of everything. The corruption, maladministration, not having a proper board, or just people doing what they like at PRASA. It has straight implications or direct implications to commuters who are using these trains on daily basis. For now, as I said before, 5 weeks without any train in the Northern Line and in the Central Line. That is something huge for someone that's been using a train for all their lives, for someone that cannot afford to use a taxi, and for someone that is unemployed sometimes. That does not only have implications on those people, it also has implications on people that are not using a train. Because now you can imagine the long queues in taxi ranks, long queues in my city, and the long queues in Golden Arrow as well. So the fact that we don't have a train in Cape Town for these two lines, it has a direct impact, and it's one of the reasons why we wrote to actually give evidence, wrote to Parliament to give oral evidence and submissions yesterday. But unfortunately, as everyone might know, the board was not able to make it. And yesterday, even though they were given time to fly from Joburg to Cape Town, there was still no one who was able to come to Cape Town. So that says a lot about people who are holding accountable, people who we actually expecting to deliver services that are meant to help us. So personally, yesterday I was very disappointed. And I felt, even though on next week Tuesday we are still going to continue and have the same meeting, but personally I'm so disappointed, and it proves a lot of things about what was entailed in that Denel report, which was written by Advocate Thuli Madonsela. So another thing that I want to talk about, again going back to the casualties. There is a court case which was, it's actually a judgment where that involves Metro Rail, PRASA, and Mr. Leslie van Minen. He stays in, where is this, not Mininberg, I forgot. But there was an incident where his son got stabbed. It happened in 2005. His son got stabbed, so he took Metro Rail to court. So during that time, So yeah, PRASA and Metro Rail, both of them, if you go back to the judgment, they never complied with the Constitutional Court, which is the judgment of the 2004, which involved subsequent order of 2009 in Rail Commuter and Action Group and 54 others, and Trusted Limited Metro Rail. So, as I said, that matter was brought forward, and even to date, they don't have a plan, a safety plan that guarantees that a person that takes a train from maybe Khayelitsha to town, the person or the commuter is going to be safe. There's going to be police visibility. There's going to be, people are going to be able to maybe press buttons, panic buttons in the trains if they feel that they're under threat. Within the PRASA as well, specifically in the Western Cape, we are faced with a lot of corruption. And personally, it scares me because we had a protest where we went to a meeting at PRASA uninvited. And I couldn't imagine I don't know how to put it, but I couldn't really imagine, because we went in and submitted the letter which we sent to the Minister of Transport. But then when we went out, we protested outside. And then the security and the guards of Metro Rail, they were so violent, trying to protect Mr. Mtura Swartz, because we were singing about him and saying he cannot be placed as the CEO of Rail Division because of his pending investigations, as well as investigations which include sexual harassment. So, in my own mind and how I see this PRASA crisis, is that it involves a lot of people, not only the people that are commuters, but only people that are employed by PRASA. If you remember, about 2 months ago, sometime in January, sometime in December, I think, there was 3 incidents where a commuter from, I think, Athlone, he was trying to escape from being robbed. Then he jumped from one carriage to another. Then he died. And then the second one was in Krisani, in Khayelitsha. Someone that works for PRASA, he had a weapon, like a gun on him. He was robbed. And then they used the same gun to shoot him. So that actually shows you, and with the evidence that I have, where it shows that Mtura Swartz, not only he has pending investigations, but he's also been employing people that are not skilled, are not registered with the security regulation, and people that are like just friends. So that put us in a lot of danger as commuters who are using PRASA. So just to close off, I want to talk about the campaign, or the upcoming campaigns that hashtag Unite Behind will be having. The first one is what's happening on Tuesday. We're going to be having oral submissions in Parliament, where we're going to be having like an interaction with Mtura Swartz, also Cromet Mulepo, including Richard Walker. So that's for us, that's an opportunity to actually ask these questions in person and understand what really is going on at PRASA, and understand when are we getting a proper board, when are we getting an emergency safety plan or an alternative transport, because had we had an alternative transport now, people will be able to use maybe a taxi or a bus, but everything is just stand still on the 2 lines, and no one seems to do anything about it. And just to close off, my main concern is that if the N2 in Cape Town was closed for 15 minutes, it would be a national crisis. Everyone would be talking about it. Everyone would be saying something about it, because it involves, or it's affecting a certain class. And at the same time, it's affecting the ins and outs of Cape Town. So I'm surprised that no one is talking about PRASA. Both no one seems to be concerned, if I may say. Because for me, it's very frustrating. It affects people that are supposed to be using these trains, people who have been using these trains for all these years. So it does have some classism or some kind of, I don't know the proper word for it, but I can see the real impacts on ordinary people that are supposed to be using these trains. So thank you, that's it for me.
Thank you very much for sharing with us today and presenting your evidence. I just have a couple of questions which we'd be grateful if you could expand on in your experience and the work you do. You've mentioned one example of PRASA's conduct towards people who were expressing their grievances when you marched to the offices. Do you think that state-owned enterprises have a special obligation to listen and hear what citizens have to say? Is it a different obligation to maybe a private company? Or is that obligation with our politicians? Where should we look to solve these problems and challenges you've raised? Should we look to PRASA, or should we look to the ministers, to our president, to cabinet?
I think if we first start with the voting system here, proportional representation, it limits your right to say anything. So everyone, for me, the fact that I can put an X and I say this is the political party that I want to vote for, so whoever gets elected by that political party is accountable to me as a citizen. So that political party who has elected a president, that president who had an obligation to elect a cabinet, that cabinet is who's electing a committee, a parliamentary committee. Those are my people. That's what I believe. Those people should be accounting to me, regardless of which legislation does what. We're following the Constitution. So I need, as a citizen of this country who was elected, not necessarily elected, but who has voted for a political party, to elect someone that's going to be accountable to me as a citizen. I understand and I can see all these bodies, different bodies that are accounting, and parliamentary committees who are supposed to call different departments, different SOEs, departments. At the end of the day, it boils down to one thing: whose tax money is being used to run all this? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. Just one other question. You mentioned that what is going on in PRASA has impacts on a particular class, and that in your view there's underreporting of what is happening and the impacts of this. What do you think the role of the media is in this? What can be done to change it? And what does your organization do to try and spread awareness about the situation on the ground?
Firstly, what I think needs to happen from the media. In Cape Town, we don't only have one crisis, unfortunately. We have a water crisis as well. And there's a lot happening in that water crisis, and in between politicians and different organizations, which are in different individuals. I can see a lot of popularism amongst. It's another conversation for another day. But what the media can do, or what my organization is currently doing, is we're currently writing letters and demanding answers. I'll come back to the media, and demanding answers from both the board of PRASA, Minister of Transport, as well as the committee who the board is supposed to be accounting to. And as I said, we've been having protests from last year, and the first big march that we had, was on the 7th of August last year. It was to recall President Zuma. So that's the work that we've been doing as Unite Behind. So, in terms of media, I don't see any commuters. I don't see any people going to taxi ranks, trying to find out how people frustrations that people are having there, and try to cover that at least, because that is gonna go to the board of PRASA, and people will be able to express themselves, which is one of the reasons why, when we went to speak to the committee yesterday, we had 2 commuters, people that are using or were using these trains, to actually give evidence as to the impact that the fact that the northern and the southern line is not working, the impact that it has on them personally. So that's one thing that I think the media can do. And they can write about what's happening, because I know for a fact fixing this or trying to find solutions to this PRASA issue or PRASA crisis is not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's not impossible. I can make an example with India. India I can draw similarities between India and South Africa. Because South Africa, we've got Metro Rail, which is a metro, and then we have Shosholoza, which goes intercity. And then they've got a similar system in India, but theirs is much more better. If you talk about train delays, if you talk about train cancellations, they're close to none. If you talk about our communication, when the train is going to delay, when we're not going to have a train, they are close to none. And they do have, but it's not as bad as South Africa. Because obviously the population is not the same as South Africa and India. So they do have trains which are overcrowded, but that you would normally see that in the inner city, the interchange within the equivalent of Shosholoza in Cape Town, sorry, in South Africa. So what I'm trying to say is that it's not impossible. We can do it. And it's not something that we not us in this room, it's not something that could have not been prevented. We could have prevented what is happening at PRASA, and we can turn around. We can be able to change, can be able to make a difference. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's all the questions from the panel, and
thank you very much. Colleagues?
Thank you very much, Zuki. As you know, this tribunal is focusing on economic crimes, and you have painted a picture of people who are unable to travel to work using the rail system in Cape Town. I just wanted to know from you the problems that are being faced by commuters. Would you attribute that to corrupt practices within the people who run the railway system? Would you say that these are happening because of corruption?
I can stand here and firmly say yes, based on the evidence that we have gathered as #UniteBehind. For an example, if we had, when I was growing up, I also used to use a train. So the length of a train, it used to be about 12 carriages. Now you would see a train that has about 4 to 5 carriages that's traveling from the CBD, Central Line, CBD, to Khayelitsha. If you think about it, how many people do you think travel using that train? So if we didn't have people who are working within PRASA that are stealing these coaches and these railway lines, literally having a network of people saying, this is where we're going to go and steal. We would never have that problem. That's one example. And then secondly, when PRASA signed a contract with Siangena Technologies, which promised to install about 200 security systems, that contract was for 4.9 billion. And then if you ask me, has that happened? Do you see any security systems within PRASA? If something happens to you, can you go and ask them, can you show me footage? I've never seen that at PRASA. If that money was spent accordingly, if we as the state, not only PRASA, even the committee, the parliamentary committee, I feel that they have failed us by not telling PRASA or the board of PRASA to account. Because they have been calling them. Yesterday was not the first time that they've called the board and they didn't pitch. Now we want to know what's going to happen. What's the next step? They're not coming, so what's the next step? And they need to come and account. They need to come and tell us what's going on. Because we can't, what's happening now, it can't be happening. We need to have a stop. We need to stop somewhere and try to find out where did we go wrong. So, I'm not sure if that answers you.
All right, thank you, Zugi.
Thanks, Sugi. So just a quick question from me that I asked the previous witness as well. So we've heard during this tribunal about the linkages between private sector and public sector corruption. And I'm interested in your case and the work that you guys have done as Unite Behind. Are there any clear linkages that you can make to private sector actors in any of these cases that you have cited? Would you say that the corruption that's happening in PRASA that has resulted in very negative impacts on the lives of the poor largely, would you say that can be linked to any private sector actor that might have had dealings with PRASA officials or anything to that effect?
Okay, let me just go back. I want to answer exactly what you're saying because I've got evidence right in front of me. So if you remember when I started speaking, I spoke about the ex-CEO of PRASA. His name was Lucky Montan. I want to go back and have, okay. So in 2015, August, as I said, we had the public protectors publishing a derailed report. And in her report, as I said, there were serious allegations of tender fraud, nepotism, corruption, conflict of interest that involved, obviously, Lucky Montan and others, not only him. So the public protector obviously had complaints, about 32 of them. In those complaints, he found that 19 of the 32 complaints were substantiated. So in 2014, Lucky Popomulefe came. Now the board was under his leadership. And then he could see that the linkage between who we're giving these tenders to and the members of the board, particularly him, Mr. Lucky Montan. So we do have like evidence to prove that he has been implicated in these dealings that were happening, corruption that is happening in PRASA, involving corrupt tenders which would allow him to get preference. For example, we know when we giving out, we're saying government has a tender. There's a certain specs, there's certain criteria that a company needs to meet. So in some instances, you would find this criteria was meant for this specific organization or private entity, which was supposed to get this tender awarded, and then a board member or someone within the body of PRASA has certain interests or actually is part of owning that company. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much for your evidence. I'm sure that it was very useful and it'll take the work of civil society forward, because you know that without a strong civil society, it is impossible to achieve the values of our Constitution. So thank you very much for that. Shall we adjourn? Until when? I believe that there is the next witness may be a little later than 1:45.
2:30.
Is it 2:30? Okay. Then we will adjourn until 2:30, or as soon as we are told that, that we are ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To our audience on the floor, just to remind you to please use the exit on my left-hand side and to collect your food voucher. This door will remain closed, so if you could kindly exit using the door at the back on my left side. Thanks.
about under
Nice
20.
and cold.
Under 20 people. She can tell you.
I'm in the water. It's very cold.
Thank you. It's for me.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we should wait for them. You're quite right. Can't have an empty place.
Oh, yeah, you're right. They're outside.
One thing I assure you, that's actually this very clear. You will not have any trouble with that. Are there lots of people?
It's filling
Mm. How was it in the morning? Okay. It's actually a huge advantage not to see the audience. Right? Because they're not bothered by them.
My cheese, what the man, my cheese. My cheese, a comrade, gag.
What?
No, Dima has been asking comrades to sing since we started. Now they are saying, they are asking if we are not going to arrest them. And say, no, they can sing.
But they must sing in tune. No?
Thank you. Thank you so much, comrades.
Okay. I know that your witness is here because he had the courtesy to say hello. So I think we can proceed.
Thank you, comrades. And we will now be proceeding with Mr. Zaki Ahmed, who is here on behalf of Unite Behind, insofar as his presentation delves into state capture. and I would like to proceed for about the next 45 minutes with Mr. Ahmed. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you for joining us today. Could we start? Would you be able to tell us about your qualifications, your experience in South Africa, and your position at the moment?
I was born in 1962 in Baragwanath Hospital, which is now...
A bit more loudly, please.
You have to pick the mic up.
Microphone, yeah.
Sorry. Well, first I have to say thank you for having me and the privilege of being able to speak about what we consider to be economic crimes, all of us, and also as a socialist, it's a really a privilege to be able to speak about crimes that are committed under capitalism. I was born in 1962 in Baragwanath Hospital, as it was then called, and my parents lived in Fitas. And I was in Joburg for 3 months before I moved to Cape Town to my grandparents. My parents were forcibly removed from Fitas, and that's what apartheid did to them in around 1970. But during the period, I moved up and down between Johannesburg and Cape Town. And the thing that struck me most about apartheid was, at that time, African people who lived in Fitas shared yards with people, and the pass laws were cruel. And as a child, I used to notice how the pass laws affected African people, and how people got dragged into what we call Goomba Goombas, the big trucks that used to come fetch people. And so from there on, I lived in Cape Town, grew up. Again, my family, not my immediate family, not our nuclear family, but my aunts and uncles were forcibly removed from District 6. And again there, I have to say that I learned about global politics from my grandfather, who couldn't read and write. And when 1976 happened, Afrikaans is my huistaal, is my moedertaal, en dis die mees fantastiese taal as jy dit kan bevry van al die konnotasies wat Afrikaner nationalisme met dit gebring het.
Now, you may have to...
I'll translate. I'll translate. My home language is Afrikaans, and it's a very beautiful language. It is a language that was built by slaves. It's a language that is in the colored community. And if it is freed from the connotations of the oppression white people and nationalists have used it for, then we can really build a different society. But we rebelled against Afrikaans. As Afrikaans speakers, we rebelled against our language because it was used to shoot children in Soweto. And in 1976, that was 1976. Obviously, we all got beaten and so on. I was 14. And at night, I got beaten worse by my parents because they said, what you doing this for? You're going to go to jail. And in 1977 was the first time I went to jail. I tried to burn my school down, much like the Fallists do these days. And like the Fallists have failed to bring the system down in a few days by burning stuff, we failed. And what I learned from that is that patient education of ourselves, myself, of activists, organizing, is equally important to barricades. And then going from there, the critical thing for me to learn was how cruel the police were, and in particular the white security police. And between the age of 15 and 18, I went to jail on about five occasions. I spent 3 months in solitary, then six months in solitary confinement, and then 7.5 months in 3 months in solitary confinement, then 6 months in solitary confinement with torture. And so that's what I know of apartheid. But as I grew up, the most critical thing I learned was that the equality was fundamental to justice, and justice was fundamental to equality. And my parents taught me that. And the critical thing is I joined the ANC in 1980 in prison. And that's why today it's such a shame for me to think that I was a member of the ANC. And it's a shame what people have done to the ANC. Phumi Mtetwa, Edwin Cameron, Mark Haywood, and many others. And so, from that perspective, I learned a great deal about the Constitution. In 1998, I was one of the co-founders of the Treatment Action Campaign, along with people like Anne Lebete, people like Anneke Meerkotte, Michael Abrams, my sister Midi Ahmed. These are the Cape Townians. Then in Johannesburg there was Sharani Kambaram, Mark Haywood, Mazibuko Jacha, and many others. So we founded the Treatment Action Campaign then. But before I have to start, I have to, on the subject, which is the arms deal, and the question of how many people died, at what cost, the arms deal to our society, and so on. There's something I must apologize for, and that is the fact that I wasn't here yesterday. And the reason I wasn't here yesterday is because of state capture. And it is with, again, it is with deep regret and shame that I have to say that Parliament has subpoenaed a judge to come and speak about state capture. Parliament has subpoenaed a newly appointed judge who is the chair of the Prasa Board at the moment. So from the 1st of January, Justice Nana Makubele became a judge in the North Gauteng High Court, in the Pretoria High Court. And yet, Parliament has subpoenaed a judge to come and answer questions about 24 billion rands worth of corruption that we're making allegations about. To come and answer questions about people being killed on trains. And my comrade Kiswa Vuka spoke this morning about this, so I don't need to go into detail. But we were called by Parliament. We asked to go to Parliament, and Parliament gave us yesterday. I postponed, Zuki postponed coming yesterday so that we could be at Parliament. Justice Makubele and her board refused to come to Parliament, refused. And therefore, yesterday was in a certain sense wasted for us, but in another sense not, because Parliament showed it was holding the executive accountable. And that will take us now into the arms deal discussion, because I believe that the question of the arms deal is what is at the root of what has gone wrong in the ANC, what has gone wrong in Parliament, what has gone wrong in our cabinet, what has gone wrong in our society. And if we don't address that, then we will fail.
Thank you. You can speak now to state capture, corruption in society as we know it now, and your contemporary role, and its interface with the arms industry and its impact ultimately on South Africa.
South Africa was captured, actually Cape Town was captured. And I have to just make an aside here. I went to the toilet here, people. And the taps are broken. They're leaking. And the toilet is leaking. And the water's running out. Coming from Cape Town, it's a worry. So Cape Town was captured by a company called the Dutch East India Company, which in turn was captured its government. And it brought slaves here like my ancestors. It enslaved the Khoi, it committed genocide. And it established the basis for the mining industry and for Cecil John Rhodes to capture the state. It established a capitalism based on white supremacy. It established a capitalism in which the mining industry destroyed the lives of tens of millions of people in southern Africa. And we have the HIV epidemic as a consequence of that mining industry. So when we speak about state capture, we have to look at our history. We cannot ignore that history. But state capture is pretty abstract when you speak about it. If you talk about apartheid and white supremacy, the Steel Engineering Federation, Industry Federation of South Africa was never called to the Truth Commission to talk about how they used the army, how they used the police to crush worker struggle. The Chamber of Mines was never called to give evidence in the way it was implicated in the destruction of black African lives. So when we speak of state capture, we have a terrible past in which there's a continuity to what has happened today. In the post-apartheid period, the first thing we have to understand is that the post-apartheid state, and I see a colleague, my brain is on firing different cylinders, Jane, surname escapes me now, but she's done superb work on the security state. And what we didn't do, what we had in 1994, is we had a revolutionary change in policies and in the constitution, having a constitution. What we didn't do is radically transform the state. Now, what elements of the state is there continuity with the old apartheid state and the old capitalist state, and what elements have changed? Parliament has changed faces, but you still have elements of the old state there. The Bantustan leaders, like Chief Kacha Buthelezi, the late Lucas Mangope was in that parliament, and so on. The ANC candidates don't get screened, so you can have people who, old security policemen, if they wanted to join. So our MPs don't get screened for their history. Similarly, if you look at the executive is not selected by the people. They don't have to account to the people in the same way, except through an election. When they go to elections, they get Parliament elects the party. Government has, people say government has 3 spheres. I believe it has 4 spheres. It has the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And here I want to say one of the reasons our courts have been so great is because it is the only part of government that has been radically transformed. For this reason, we have the Judicial Services Commission. And any judge who goes to that commission gets grilled on what they've done, both in the past, in the present, and some, I hope, will get grilled about what they're going to do in the future, like Justice Makubele. So the question for me is, what's the 4th element of government, the 4th sphere of government? It's the bureaucracy. And we never speak about the bureaucracy as an arm of the state. So literally, if you look at the police force, and I call it a force because it is it is the old apartheid police force, the central government's one, that brought in the Bantustans. And now it is established that culture. Similarly, if you look at the city of Cape Town, and you look at the DA government in the Western Cape, it is white privilege and wealth privilege and white property power that is privileged over everything else. And so you can get the state, the property developers, capture the city council and the provincial government to sell off state land in the city, which is meant to house poor people, to sell that off and make it possible for the wealthy to do what they didn't do under apartheid, and that is push working class people even further out of the city. So in that sense, state capture has continued. What I want to just quickly go through on the arms deal is what the arms deal did is I want to speak about 3 things that it did. Executive lawlessness. Now, what do I mean by executive lawlessness? It is when a cabinet minister or a minister or the president think they're above the law in the way that Batabile Dlamini acts, in the way like Jacob Zuma acts, in the way like many other people act. So executive lawlessness is the one element. The second problem that came with it is the undermining of institutions that were independent and that were meant to protect us. Parliament, the public protector, the Special Investigation Unit, the National Prosecuting Authority. The third thing it did, actually there are 4 things. The third thing it did was it compromised and corrupted the humanity. It compromised and corrupted the humanity of people in our society, people we trust. And the last thing it did is that it captured and silenced the ANC as the vestiges of democracy that existed in the ANC. And the ANC, as a consequence, became a tool of state capture. And so all previous Secretary Generals of the ANC should be asked to explain what happened with the arms deal. Because why were they quiet? They knew about it. Why were they quiet? I want to mention the people that I think this tribunal needs to speak to. Obviously, President Mbeki. The second one is Alec Irwin. He should be called, and he is implicated. He was one of the greatest defenders of the arms deal. The third one is Ronnie Kasrils, who continues to maintain a credible anti-apartheid history, or tries to, but is so implicated in that arms deal that it is a shame that he continued to defend it at that so-called commission called the Sariti Commission. Trevor Manuel, who knew that the arms deal was corrupt and had advised against it but was complicit in it. Tera Lakota, who is now a savior of the country, he should be called. Frene Jinwala, Dr. Frene Jinwala, a person of enormous stature, but someone who silenced Parliament, someone who silenced Parliament and parliamentarians, people like the late Lalu Chiba, Andrew Feinstein, Gavin, I can't remember his surname now, Gavin Woods, and so on. Of course, Jacob Gedlich Zuma. But then I want to say to my comrades in Takia, when we had a visit in, I think it was about 2000, it was about 2000 in Kailicha at the office, the first big office of TAC. We had a visit from the Swedish Defense Minister, or Deputy Defense Minister. And she came and she asked, what's going on with AIDS and so on, and what can we do? And do you guys need money? And I said, no, if you pay back the money taken by the Swedish companies, our government would be able to afford to treat us. Similarly, the people in Britain, Germany and France, and other countries, but I am not an expert on the arms deal. I have followed it through books of Paul Holden, Andrew Feinstein, and so on, and that's where I leave it. On the arms deal and public health, the tragedy of the ANC government is when it came to power, the treasury was empty. The treasury was completely empty. And what that meant is that there was no money in the bank. South Africa owed an incredible amount of money to local pension funds, to companies abroad who had done business with South Africa, and we had to pay back that debt. And the choice was go bankrupt or pay the debt. It was a difficult choice. We chose to pay back the debt, but we chose to pay back at such a high level that it cut services. It meant no new nurses were employed. When the nurse died, they didn't employ a new one. When a hospital cleaner died, they didn't employ a new one. Ronnie Green Thompson, Dr. Ronnie Green Thompson, he was the head of health in KwaZulu-Natal, reported in almost a good way. He was thinking he was making a good report to Parliament saying that we haven't filled so many thousands of posts because we're cutting back. Now, the difficulty of that is that debt was then, as it is now, because of Jacob Zuma and state capture, debt then was paying back at the largest item in our national budget. That was the largest item in our national budget. And today it's the largest item in our national budget. And as a consequence, the arms deal added to that debt. It added to that debt. It was unnecessary and it added to that debt. So we hit what people in philosophy call a perfect storm. And the perfect storm was austerity, that is the cutback of social services. We lost of competent staff, and we didn't replace them. We expanded our healthcare services at the same time. You will remember that Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma did a fantastic job as health minister. She brought clinics close to people. She built clinics in townships. But that clinics didn't have enough staff. They didn't have enough medicines. And so we expanded services, we cut the budget, and at the same time we had an explosion. The HIV epidemic started in 1980, in the 1980s. So when we got to 1994, 95, 96, 99, definitely, the epidemic had matured and moved from an HIV epidemic into an AIDS epidemic when people were dying. And so at that particular point, you can see the public health service, not enough money, not enough staff, expanding to try and reach more people in the right way, and austerity. So the arms deal brings us to a very difficult situation, because why was the HIV program then not funded properly? Prevention, treatment, care, and so on. The first place we have to start is that one of the industries that captures governments, locally and globally, is the pharmaceutical industry. It captures governments. So in the United States, there are 2 pharmaceutical lobbyists for every member of Congress. 2 pharmaceutical lobbyists for every member of Congress. And how do they capture? They normally fund the president's parties, they fund both parties' election campaigns, and then they fund the legislators' election campaigns, and then they get the money, and then they win the policy that they want. And so one of the things that was critical is that the pharmaceutical company, people think, when they think of HIV, they think of ARVs. But when the government could not afford antiretroviral therapy, when the government could not afford it, at that point, the treatment of opportunistic infections was possible. But the cost of opportunistic infection drugs like fluconazole, which was used to treat systemic thrush, was about 3,000 rand for 1 week's treatment. And you could get the same medicine in Thailand for less than 100 rand. For less than 100 rand. And in Brazil and in India. So that shows you how drug companies profiteered. To go to the question of 1996, at that point, treatment became possible. You had combination therapy. And what that meant is this. What that meant is this, that you take 3 drugs and you combine them, and people live. I have been on the same 3 drugs since 2003. Cidovudine, lamivudine, and nevirapine. AZT, 3TC, and nevirapine. That's what it's called. And these aren't fancy drugs. These were funded by universities in the United States that made them. Those companies made them. But those drug companies said intentionally, we can't sell these drugs at a price at a price that is affordable to poor countries. So 1 month's drug supplies would cost 10,000 rand. There is no way the South African state could afford to treat people at 10,000 rand. And the drug companies would come with the excuse, Africans don't know how to take time, and you need to take these medicines on time. Yet South Africa today has the best adherence rate in the world for antiretroviral therapy. So it shows you how drug companies attacked government. Particularly, they attacked the Medicines Act. Bill Clinton decided to put South Africa on a sanctions watch list because the drug companies had captured him. And people think he's a savior today of people living with HIV. But he contributed to millions of deaths across our continent by siding with drug companies. And I'm not only talking here about HIV medicines, but medicines for cancer, diabetes, and so on behalf of the drug companies. The drug companies, the European Union, these companies were responsible for death. Now, we have an alternative. Brazil and India made medicines affordable to their people living with HIV. Now, government would not have been able to afford it, but come 2000, and an Indian company, the first thing that happens around 2001, in 2000, an Indian company says, we can provide treatment for people at $350 a year. $350 a year. Now, $350 a year at that time would have been 3,500 Rand a year. Compare that to 10,000 Rand a month. So literally, we could have afforded from about 2,000 to treat people. We could have afforded the money that was used in the arms industry could have been used to fund 1 billion condoms. That would have led to people not getting infected. The money could have been used to prevent mother-to-child transmission of HIV. The money could have been used to ensure rape survivors had access to treatment. That did not happen because we were in debt and we were in an arms deal which we did not need, at least not at that scale, and it was corrupt. So the perfect storm that people called became a perfect catastrophe for people living with HIV. And I haven't, for the last 10 years, spoken about HIV in this way, and in public. I've done some other things. And I want to leave what I'm saying with a few points on the epidemic and what needs to be done in relation to the arms deal. And then I want to quickly turn to today. The conscious, perhaps in a certain way worse than the arms deal, was what we didn't expect would happen. And that was the denial of HIV's scientific origins or its scientific causes. The denial that HIV caused AIDS in Mbeki. And it was very sad for me personally as an ANC member at that time. And it was sad because he was the chair of the National AIDS Council of South Africa at that time. He was the government representative, and when he changed his mind and became an HIV denialist, that was a terrible moment. And that meant that what I would ask this commission this tribunal to look at, is to look at the definition of a crime against humanity, both in terms of the international, the Rome Statute as we've adopted in our local law. Because I believe that there was a conscious intention to deny millions of people life-saving medicine. And that conscious intention was carried out by the drug companies through their abuse of patents. It was also caused by our government. For the president said two things. He said, HIV doesn't cause AIDS, the drugs are poisonous, and in any event we can't afford them. Well, we could afford them, and they weren't, of course they had side effects. They had serious side effects in many people. But they saved our lives. And they've saved millions of lives. In South Africa today, nearly 3 million people are on antiretroviral therapy. So, what is necessary for the Commission to ask is whether, in relation to HIV, there was a conscious decision of policy to deny people medicines. And if there was a conscious decision to deny people medicine, then intention led to death. And again here, who were the people who died? Gay men, black people, black gay men, black women, infants and children, lives that people regard through a corrupted humanity, lives that people regard as dispensable. Sadly, the late spokesperson for President Mbeki was a chap called Parks Mankatlana. And he said, we cannot prevent mother-to-child transmission because the children will live and then the mothers will die. So let's kill the mother and the child. Basically, that was the answer that meant. And he was speaking on behalf of the president. So who are the people that need to be asked about this? Again, we start with President Mbeki. We start with his enforcer, a chap called Isopahad. And his enforcer was the person who would go to Parliament under the arms deal and with HIV and scream at people and say, if you don't follow the line, we will get you. That is what that man did. Similarly, it is a tragedy that the late Minister of Health passed away, but she would have had to account. But again, there are other people like Tamim Seleko. There are other people like, I can send you a list later. But there are people we need to thank, people who stood by us. And the first person I want to mention here is because he died recently. Lalu Chiba. Lalu Chiba, he went onto the committee and he stood by us. The second person I want to mention is because he's still alive, and he's Dr. Aben Komo. I know him, I hope he's alive. Dr. Aben Komo, because he chaired the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Health, and he tried his best, and eventually he was banished to Malaysia because the health minister didn't want him there. The third person we should thank is Dr. Albertina Lutuli on that committee. She helped. The first ANC member, apart from myself, who wore an HIV positive t-shirt, was Mamnomzamo Winnie Mandela, Madikizela Mandela. And we need to thank her for that, even though people might have reservations about other things she did. We thank her for that. There was a researcher of the Health Committee, Lynette Sait, Barbara Hogan, Preg's governor, Nozizwe Madlala Rutledge, Dr. Ayandan Saluba, who resigned, Dr. Nono Simelela, and Ms. Precious Matsoso, who's today the Director General of Health, and under her watch, the ARV program has gone to 3 million. Those are the people who stood by us. But there were also scientists like Dr. Mahoba and many others. So what I want to say today is in relation to state capture. What you do is you steal a president, you capture a president. Once you've captured the president, you try and capture as many of the executives as possible. You capture policy. You then capture the head of a department of government and other officials in the department. Similarly, you then go on to capture the board of a state-owned enterprise, whether it's Eskom, whether it is PRASA, whether it is Transnet. Once you've captured the board, and I'm not saying all board members, and I'm not saying all members of parliament, and I'm not saying all members of the executive. Once you've captured them, you capture the management of a state-owned entity. And after you've captured them, you go to supply chain management and finance. And today, we know what has happened. We know what has happened because there are decent black professionals, decent white professionals who leak information to us on a daily basis. On Monday, 3 sets of documents were leaked to us. The first set of documents showed that under Justice Makubele's interim chairperson of the board, R1 billion was to be transferred to a bank called the VBS Bank. The VBS Bank. That bank paid out Zuma's bond for Nkandla. Right? That bank doesn't have enough money to cover the money that PRASA will give. And PRASA in a memo says that the money that they will put in the bank will come from other capital projects. Meantime, People ride on top of the trains and fall off them. So when we speak of state capture, I'm sorry I'm going on so long. When we speak of state capture, in the end, the people who suffer most are people without water, people who cannot afford electricity, and people who die riding trains. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one point. I was wondering if you could offer your recommendations in light of your history and your experience for ensuring that the Zondo Commission of Inquiry is an effective inquiry and that everyone who needs to be held to account can be held to account.
I have serious confidence that Deputy Chief Justice Ray Zondo would do a superb job in this, but it depends on how all of us assist him in the evidence. I believe that the first step that the Commission has to make sure is that it does not stop any criminal investigation. And it doesn't allow people to come there and say, there's criminal investigations going either. So these are some suggestions. I'm sure I have others, but I'm feeling a little tired.
Thank you. And in light of the time, that's all the questions from the evidence leaders, and I'll hand over to the panel for any questions you may have.
All right, thank you very much, Zaki. Two questions from me. The first one is we have been listening here to evidence on the arms deal, and we also had some evidence on the Sereti Commission. And I did to see whether you have any view on the Sereti Commission. And the reason I'm asking this is that it is argued that there was an investigation, there was a Judicial Commission of Inquiry, and it had findings. And why are you digging all of this up when there was a process? So that's the first question, yeah.
I think the simple answer to that is that I commend the people who refused to give evidence to that commission because it was a whitewash. I believe that it didn't listen to all the evidence. I believe that it deliberately did not want to hear the evidence, and it didn't call the people who were the real criminals, including Jacob Zuma. Sufficient of them. They called President Mbeki, they called Alec Owen, they called Ronnie Kasrils, but they allowed those people to run circles around them because they didn't want to have the facts in front of them.
All right, thanks. You spoke about what you call executive lawlessness, and you've made some recommendations about state capture now. I just wanted to know whether beyond dealing with the state capture and what happens with the state-owned enterprises, whether you think that what you call executive lawlessness can be contained within the sort of electoral system that we have of proportional representation, party list systems, and that strengthens party tops and head offices of parties, yeah.
That is a very important question, thank you. Not that the other one wasn't, but this one is a remedial question. It's a seriously remedial question. I'll answer it in two parts. The first part is what we need to do with state-owned enterprises. State-owned enterprises are some of the most important engines to our economy, and therefore they have to be treated with all the respect because they are critical to the redistribution of wealth, and they are critical to letting the economy grow. They are critical to creating a class of young people who are trained in science and so on, who are trained in skills. And so what they mean to us is enormous. And the first recommendation in relation to them is that all boards should be appointed through a process similar to the Judicial Services Commission. All boards should be appointed through a process similar to the Judicial Service Commission, where parliamentarians, trade unions, professional bodies in that area can make recommendations, and civil society, anyone in society can nominate a good person to sit on a board. And in that way, a hearing is then held, Recommendations are made to Parliament and then to the President to appoint. President signs off, doesn't appoint. The President carries out the instruction of Parliament. On the second question in relation to electoral accountability and executive lawlessness, I think that the President has too much power. I think our President, in a certain way, has more power than P.V. Botha had, or has arrogated himself more power than P.V. Botha had. In the sense that P.V. Botha used his powers to kill people. He didn't, in the same way, use his powers to enrich himself and try and avoid justice for that. Regrettably, he wasn't put on trial for killing our people. But at the same time, our President has arrogated too much power to himself. So in doing a remedial action in relation to state-owned enterprise and executive lawlessness, the first thing is to have a good board. The second is to limit the power of the President. And the third, when it comes to the question of electoral reform, I think what one must be careful what one wishes for. Because if you look at our city councils, they have a mixed electoral system. And that should happen at national level, I think. But that doesn't automatically preclude corruption and capture, as the really great book by Crispian Olver, How to Steal a City, shows. And you can also entitle it How to Steal the ANC at the same time.
Thank you, Zaki.
Thanks, Zaki. So just a quick question from me. So my understanding of things as I've been listening and from reading and hearing stories of apartheid and maybe colonialism is that the face of capital hasn't really changed. Business, big business in South Africa at least, remains largely white. And if you look at it that way, those are the same people that had captured state under the apartheid system, and the same people that continue to capture state now. Of course, there are captors now who are not so white, and we will not acquit them of what they have done. But my question is, so now that we are in post-apartheid South Africa, we have so many people coming out and condemning apartheid as this deeply corrupt and cruel system. To what extent do we hold capital to account for their complacency and the role that they played in killing a whole nation under apartheid? That's one part of it. But another part of it is post-apartheid South Africa, there has to be good business people, right? And I want to believe they are. And my question is, what becomes our call of those people? What becomes their role in calling out the capture of state now, which continues to disadvantage the same people that it did under apartheid? What are we saying to business? What are we calling them to do? What becomes their role, beside really saying we condemn state capture, we condemn corruption? What is it that they can actively do to assist in curbing corruption right now in South Africa?
Well, I think, I mean, again, those two questions we really need to discuss as a country, because they're very important ones, and they're the ones that have led to a society not being just and equal. And I didn't say what I'm doing now. At the moment, I'm on the organizing secretariat of Unite Behind, which is a coalition of people's movements, and my colleague, Comrade Zuki, gave evidence this morning. But capital needs to be held accountable. And it is true to a large extent that the boardrooms are predominantly white. But it is also more complex than that. And I still believe that the phrase racial capitalism and white monopoly capitalism has some validity. So what I'm saying now has to be taken into account at the same time. We have trade union investment companies that are part of gentrification. Their workers are desperately poor, but they invest in hotels and malls, right? So trade unions are invested in those companies. You have a company like MTN, which is predominantly black-owned, that exploits people in Nigeria, in Zambia, and elsewhere. So capital's ownership has become it's owned by pension funds, it's owned by white people, it's owned by international global corporations, and so but the culture, you are absolutely right, is that the culture of capitalism is a culture of white supremacy, because it came through colonialism and it came through apartheid. And that culture of devaluing human life and seeing human life itself as a commodity, as something to be bought and sold, through whether you sell people medicines or not, is a critical question. I would like to appeal to all the friends, and I'll call them friends for now, in the business leadership South Africa. And I have a good friend there, his name is Adrian Enthoven. He works at Hollard Insurance, or is one of the owners. He owns Nando's Chickens. But people like him have a duty. They have a duty to pay living wages to their workers. They have a duty to contribute to a fund that ensures that people have a universal income grant. And they have a duty not to use legal loopholes to evade taxes, among other things. So, and I do want President, well, let me not jump the gun, Deputy President Ramaphosa, to ensure that the minimum wage bill that is before Parliament really needs to change and be much more serious about being a minimum wage, even though that concept is a difficult one.
I do respect your experience, your life experience, in the way you described it, and your invaluable information that you shared with us on the fight against HIV/AIDS and the connection between the arms deal and the deprivation and the resulting loss of thousands of lives as a result of the withholding of medication. So I accept all that. The difficulty I have is that this tribunal has a very specific mandate. We're looking at economic crime. We're looking at the arms deal, and I see you as a person who's sharing opinions and sharing commentaries on this. I don't receive from you any specific research or information that you are privy to. You referred to one document which you said was sneaked out, so presumably it's secret because you're making no reference to who, how, and what is in that document. So I have some difficulty on how to weigh the value of your evidence on what we are required to look at.
That's the most important thing that I've heard so far, and I think any witness should be cross-examined for credibility, for the weight of evidence, and everything I've written, and unfortunately I was busy and I really didn't have the time to come, but I made the time. But I'm quite prepared to get a document for every allegation I've made and to get that to the Commission and to do a submission. And if at any point you want to ask me further questions, I'd be available to do so. My training has been in English, not in law, but I have worked with many great lawyers, and I believe that people should know law better than lawyers. So everything I've said, I'm prepared to stand by and to find the credible written evidence. And the documentation that I spoke of, we make public always, we don't hide it.
Well, the chair will comment on that, and I suppose the evidence leader as well.
Done.
Chair, I'm done, yes.
I think that the evidence leaders will decide in terms of how far they want to go, whether they require written submissions from you or not. We would not like to make that decision. So I'm sure that if they want more from you, they will ask you.
Thank you.
The issue I want to raise is not strictly related to these proceedings either, but it arises out of something you said, that the president has too much power. A lot of the president's power, like the appointment of the commissioner of police, the appointment of judges, the appointment of the national director of prosecutions and so on, is, in my understanding, not the power of the president alone. It is the power of the president exercised in cabinet. Now, you may still say that the president has too much power because the cabinet is part of the ANC, the majority party is part of the ANC, and so on. But I wonder what is on what understanding do you make the comment you do, on the understanding that it is the president in cabinet who does all these things, and therefore cabinet, each member of cabinet must take full responsibility for the decision of the collective?
Justice Ekub, on that question, the first thing is that I think that the appointments, first what I think would be ideal is that if commissioners of police and so on are openly that there's a public process like the Judicial Services Commission that appoints people like that to their point.
Like who?
The Commissioner of Police, the National Director of Public
No, that I understand that point. But it is your understanding now that cabinet does it or the president does it by himself?
So on certain boards, like the PRASA board, for instance, PRASA is governed by the South African Transport Services Legal Succession Act, and that allows the minister to appoint a board. It doesn't even say that the cabinet or the president has to be involved in it, so it simply allows the minister to appoint a board for an entity with about 70 billion rands worth of assets. That is difficult. That can't be done that way. The second question is the president has to sign off on most boards and most decisions. And even though cabinet is involved in that decision, I remember discussions with a minister who was in public enterprises at one point, and she pointed out that she had put evidence, new board members before the president for ESCOM and SAA and so on. And the president had to put it before cabinet, and he just did not put it before cabinet. He said, let's discuss it later. So the question is that in an executive presidency, as we have in a certain way, he's not directly elected by the people, he's elected by his party. If he's the party leader, he is going to dominate, and if his faction is dominant in parliament, he's going to have the power over his cabinet, and cabinet members serve at his discretion. But cabinet is collectively responsible, because they should stand up and say, we want those board names, we want to appoint good people,
absolutely,
and so on.
Absolutely. So the real then it's not only the fault of the president, absolutely, it is the fault of cabinet as well. That is the point. And would it be overstating it to say each and every cabinet minister who was part of President Zuma's cabinet actually has to accept joint responsibility for everything that he has done, which should be a cabinet decision?
I think, Judge, in order not to prejudge the matters, I think cabinet minutes would show who resisted and who did not. And I think on that basis, what I would do is there's certain people who definitely are part of a criminal enterprise, and there are others who served in his government who tried to do the best they can. But no one can escape the fact that they knew. No one can escape that fact, that they knew of the corruption. And so the question is that's going to come down, did they, in staying there and not speaking out, were they complicit? That's a separate question. There's certainly many of them who have not spoken out, who are half-decent or decent people, are morally complicit. But the question of legality has to be decided on what the cabinet minutes say.
Let's take the appointment of the last police commissioner as an example. It's supposed to be a decision by cabinet. Cabinet can't be, and no cabinet member can be heard to say, A, that they were not consulted, because otherwise they must do their duty and take the president to court and say you made the decision unlawfully. Isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your evidence. It was very useful. And as I said, if the evidence leaders want more of you, they will say so. And you've come a long way, so we're having a bit of a film now. You might stay and watch it. It won't take too long, 15 minutes or so. And that's notice to everyone too. We'll adjourn for a while.
Can I say forward to socialism, Judge?
Okay. To make sure that the premises are prepared, and then we will come back as part of the audience to watch with you rather than as panel members. Thank you very much.
1, 2. Okay. 2, 1, 1, 2.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, could I just have your attention for a few minutes? We apologize for the delay. There's just been some technical difficulties that we're trying to address at the moment. So if we could just have your patience for a few more minutes, hopefully we will be up and running in the next few moments. And after that, we will be proceeding to the exhibition. The judges are currently deliberating so that they can deliver their preliminary findings today at 6:30. And that's much anticipated. So we're hoping, if possible, that you'd be able to stay for that. Otherwise, we completely understand if there are difficulties in that regard. So just to ask for your patience for a few more minutes while we try to sort out the technicalities of showing the video. Okay.